Hey, welcome to Your Bible Questions Answered. I'm your host, Dr. Douglas Hamp. On this show, I take your questions. Let's get into it. All right, now there's a few things to just let you know about. If you want to support this ministry, you can go to thewaycongregation.com. You can become part of the Way. You can also go to patreon.com/Doug Hamp, and you can give as little or as much as you want. Thank you very much to all my patrons already. It makes a big difference. So thank you guys. I really do appreciate it. All right. I am taking your questions. These can be found on the app, The Way Congregation. You can get that in the Apple Store or the Google Play Store, and you can put your questions there, or you can put them right here in the chat. I'm looking forward, as always, to getting into your questions. So without further ado, we're taking a trip to Israel, but without further ado, let's get into your questions. All right, we're going to start off here. All right, Matthew asks, is there anything that would be sinful about hunting clean animals, and should you pray over your kill rather than thanking Abba? Matthew, there's nothing sinful at all about hunting clean animals. So I think you can do that um, without any guilt, without any sense that you're doing something wrong. We know that Jesus ate meat. We know that eating meat was perfectly acceptable. God told the children of Israel to take a lamb or a goat and to slaughter it. And when you're hunting, you're simply getting something that you're not raising domestically. It's out there, and there are a number of clean animals that are certainly acceptable to eat. Deer being one of those, probably the most obvious in my mind, anyway. So I don't think there's any problem at all. Nothing sinful about that. Now, should you pray over it rather than thanking Abba? Well, I don't exactly know what you mean by pray over it. If you mean, Lord, please bless this food to my body, I don't think there's anything wrong with that prayer. I don't think that God is going to last minute change the molecular composition of the food to somehow make it better. I think that is incumbent upon us to eat healthy, and we need to eat things that God said we can eat and stay away from things he said not to eat. And, and even with things that we can eat, if we are gluttonous, then we're going to suffer the consequences of that. And, America is especially prone to that. We have way too much sugar, and you got people with all kinds of diseases, and we're praying, oh, Lord, save us. And yet, I think it's really upon us, for the most part, to change our diet, change our ways. And, that's hard. I know it's hard because I like sometimes some food that's not so healthy as well. All right. Thank you for that, Matthew. Lewis asks, please explain Romans 10:4 and how we are still under the dietary laws when Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes. So, Lewis, it's pretty simple, and I might have mentioned this last week. I'm just going back over some that I think I maybe didn't get to thoroughly, but this one is very simple. The word there in Romans 10:4 is that it's the word telos, okay, and the word telos for end can also be the objective or the goal. So, Christ is the end of the law. Christ is the goal of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes. So if you understand it in that way, you don't have to take my word for it. Go check out the lexicons. I would not recommend Strong's. I don't think it's um, a very good resource. But the best way, which is even better than a lexicon, is to do a search on that Strong's number or the word and see how that word in all of its various variations is used in Scripture. And you'll see what I mean, that he is the goal of the law. Now, what happens is many people want to use the word goal or end as in the terminus, that the end point, where something is done, finished, over, kaput, and they want to say, so therefore Christ is the ending of the law. He's the termination of the law, but that is incorrect. He is the goal or the end goal of the law. Why do we keep the law? Just for keeping it? No. We keep it because our goal is to be like Christ. That is our goal. And It really is that simple. And I know that you would agree with me. Probably 99% of what I'm going to say here is that as a Christian, what is our goal? We want to be like Christ. And what did Christ do? He kept the law perfectly. Okay. So he certainly challenged the Pharisees and others who were inventing and adding man-made ideas into the mix, things that God never said to do, like you couldn't heal on the Sabbath. Jesus is like, hey, you're of more value than a sheep or a donkey that maybe fell into a ditch. And so if it's okay to save a life of an animal on the Sabbath, then what about saving a human life or improving the quality of life of a human, right? And so he certainly challenged a lot of the interpretations of the rabbis at the time, but he never ever challenged the law because he is the author of the law. It really is so simple. The problem is how man was and still is interpreting those laws. And so the best way, the perfect way to understand is to look at the life of Jesus. I think there are a lot of great rabbis out there. There's a lot of great rabbis in the past, and we can learn from them. But the greatest rabbi of all time, forever and ever, is Yeshua, because he not only talked about it, but he lived it. And then he says, hey, I got this new commandment for you. Now do it as I did it, right? So that is what he would have us to do. Love one another as I have loved you. And what is the Torah all about? Loving God and loving your neighbor as yourself. Those are the two things. So as far as dietary, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do what Yeshua did. All right. That's all I can say. I'm going to do what Yeshua did. He was not eating pork. He was not eating shrimp, etc. So I'm going to just follow his example. But you know what? You're free to do whatever you want to do. All right. You have the freedom to do that. Just like we all have the freedom to, um, put harmful substances in our bodies. And hey, you might get lucky. You might not. So that's all I can tell you. All right. Thank you for that. Good question. Jonathan says there's no debate that appointed times are observed by the lunar cycle. What is your reasoning behind keeping the Sabbath on a separate cycle when it is the first Moedim mentioned in Leviticus 23? Well, Jonathan, I think it's very simple. The Sabbath is the first ever Moed that is mentioned in Scripture. It is Genesis chapter 2, right? So God Shabbated, Vayishbot is the word there. He rested, he stopped creating on which day? Well, let's count them, right? The first day, second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day, sixth day, and the seventh day is when he Sabbathed. And guess what comes after the seventh day? The first day, all right? It's very, very, very simple math, okay? So when you count to 7, the next day is always going to be the first day. So the lunar cycle people have created a lot of confusion to suggest that somehow the Sabbath is going to start over on the beginning of the month. That is not at all realistic. First of all, God never said to do such a thing. He never mentioned that to the children of Israel at Mount Sinai, where he had a great opportunity to do that if mankind had been doing it wrong ever since then. And then, roughly 1400 years go by, and guess what? Yeshua shows up. And again, if Israel and the Jews had been doing it wrong, then that was a perfect opportunity for Yeshua to set everyone straight, right? When he was healing a man with dropsy or healing somebody who was blind, and the Pharisees were all mad that he was doing it on the Sabbath, that would have been the time for Yeshua to say, what are you talking about? Today is not the Sabbath. Today's Tuesday, but he didn't. He didn't do that because it wasn't Tuesday. It was indeed the Sabbath. And he had no qualms with when they were celebrating the Sabbath, because he agreed with that as per his actions and per him going into the synagogue on the Sabbath day to teach. He fully endorsed that day as being the Sabbath. What he had issues with was how they interpreted what you could and could not do on the Sabbath. And so he took issue with that, but nothing else. He, in nowhere in his ministry, did he ever once suggest that the day that they were recognizing as the Sabbath was not the Sabbath. Rather, he absolutely approved it. He endorsed it. He agreed with it. He worshiped on it, and that was that. All right. So, the burden of proof, which there is none, quite frankly, is on people who suggest that this lunar Sabbath turns into that it starts over. And quite frankly, I'm just going to tell you my opinion on this. I think it's lunacy to follow a lunar Sabbath, because every month the Sabbath is changing, and I have no idea how somebody holds down a job or they have any kind of normalcy in their life when the day off, the sacred day, is constantly changing. I mean, I think it's mayhem. So, people that want to follow that, um, I suppose their heart's in the right place, but I think their facts are absolutely bizarre and bonkers. Okay. So, if that's something that you are entertaining, I would strongly encourage you to not go that direction. But of course, you're free to make your own choice. So thank you for the good question. I did do a debate on this. If you want to check on my YouTube channel, the Lunar Sabbath debate, that was several years ago. So you'll have to just do a little searching there in YouTube. All right. Thank you for that. Diana asks, what exactly occurred at the Council of Nicaea and Laodicea? Who were the players, and what, if any, effect do these have on the Bible as we know it today? Well, for the most part, all right, I'm going to oversimplify here, but the councils of Nicaea really met, well, in part. Again, I'm oversimplifying, but they met to establish what was um, recognizable canon. They didn't decide that something was canon. They simply were recognizing that something already was canon, and that's when they, um, put, so let's call it the official stamp of the church's approval anyway on books that were already considered to be canon. All right, so that's really important. And sometimes people think that they came up with what books should be included and what books shouldn't be included. It was already well established what books were considered to be sacred and which ones were not. The Council of Nicaea was trying to stamp out some of the Gnostic books so that they would not be considered part of the canon of Scripture. And sometimes it's nice to have a committee say, nope, we already know this, right? So I'm less up to date on Laodicea, but I can't really say too much about that. All right, Diana asks, in your professional assessment, are there any intertestamental, extra-biblical, or pseudepigraphical books that you deem historically accurate, credible, or scripturally endorsed? I think the Book of Jubilees is probably one of the better texts. The Book of First Enoch, I think, contains a fair amount of historical information, but it's always difficult to pinpoint exactly what is and what isn't. Now, intertestamental, extra biblical, the book of First Maccabees contains a lot of historical information that I think is very much a good read. Let's see, they're all interesting. I mean, it's not to say that nothing is interesting, and it's not to say that none of them are valuable, because I think they're all, in one sense or another, somewhat valuable. They give us perspectives on what people were thinking in the Second Temple period, and that helps us to interpret the mindset of what was happening sometimes in the New Testament. It helps us to understand the expectation of the coming Messiah, the expectation that he would be both the son of Joseph or Ephraim, and he'd also be the son of David. This expectation that he'd be the son of man, and he'd also be the son of God. that he would rise on the third day. So there's a lot of great stuff that we can look at and say, oh, okay, that's what they were expecting. But I don't think that we can really. I don't think we can genuinely put the idea of scripture on it. I think we'd be hard pressed to do that. All right, another question from Diana: is the Sumer Tablet of Destinies real? Well, I mean, yes and no. It depends what you mean by real. Did the ancient people believe within their mythologies that there was such a thing that Enlil held? The answer is yes, that he held on to the Tablet of Destinies. Now, I would suggest that the New Testament equivalent of the Tablet of Destinies is, in fact, the scroll that we find in Revelation chapter 5. All right, so I think that is what the ancients were talking about when they said the Tablet of Destinies. I think the scroll at the Father's right hand, that no one was found worthy to break its seals in heaven or earth, so says the mighty angel. And then John began to weep. And then an elder said, don't weep. The Lion of the tribe of Judah has overcome. And he looked and he saw a lamb as though it had been slain. And he was found worthy to open the scroll and its seven seals. So I think that is, in fact, the Tablet of Destinies. Of course, it's not called that, right? But when we understand what this Tablet of Destinies did, then I think it's real. Now, was there an actual physical thing that you could hold in your hand? I doubt it. I don't think there was ever anything that you could actually hold on to in your hand in this world. All right, I think it was an idea that was embodied in this idea of a tablet, and this Tablet of Destinies gave the holder thereof the power to decree fates. But I don't think there was an actual physical, clay tablet somewhere, or a stone tablet or something like that you could hold in your hand. So, yeah, a little bit of nuance answer there. All right, good. Taryn asks, do you think the ancient gods like Baal, Ishtar, and Molech are fallen angels? If not, then where do they come from? And if yes, then how can Ishtar be a fallen angel if angels were only ever males? So, Taryn, I do think that Baal and Molech are fallen angels. I think many of them are simply reiterations of Satan or Nimrod. So when you start tracing Nimrod through the ancient world, it becomes very interesting, because Nimrod was Ninurta in the ancient world. Ninurta, if you look at the key letters there, um, the what's called the root letters, right? The shorashim, I was thinking in Hebrew there, the shoresh, or the root letters. You have mem, resh, dalet, and so mem, resh, dalet we find in the name Marduk, Martu, um, Martu, and variations on that theme, as well as the god Mars. So becomes Martes if you speak Spanish, and you know that Martes is the same. So that's Nimrod. Nimrod also became a variation of Heracles or Hercules. He was also a variation on the god um, Melkart, so Melek Karat, so the king of the city, which is in reference to Ezekiel 28. And again, that's really interesting. And then it becomes a little bit difficult to figure out, who am I talking about here? Am I talking about Satan, Enlil, or am I talking about Nimrod or Ninurta? And the answer is, yeah, you are. You're talking about both, because a lot of times they were overlapping. And Enlil's qualities, his authority and his throne, were passed on to Ninurta. And so you really couldn't tell, you couldn't distinguish between them. And I think something very significant happened back then, which I detail in Corrupting Image Volume 2. Now, per your question, Ishtar, so, it's interesting that nowadays, many people who are New Agers and whatnot, they are sometimes talking about Ashtar, the leader of the Galactic Federation, and he's presented as a man. All right, so I would say that these fallen angels all embody male angel characteristics. And of course, male is not probably the right word there, because so far as we know, the angels are, they don't seem to have a specific, I don't know. I'm getting into, let me think. Hold on. So I'm going to retract this. So when we look at Michael, right, he clearly is identified as a male, right? But not a male in the same sense that males humans can be male and female, right? So there isn't that distinction. But what's interesting is that um yeah, so when we think about Ishtar, then whatever this fallen angel is or was simply becomes a deception, right? That is, it's a facade that is put forward to humanity to give the impression. So I don't think that there's an actual female goddess out there. I mean, I think there are embodiments of these female goddesses, but I don't think there's an actual angel who is somehow, a female angel, if that kind of makes sense. I mean, it gets a little weird because we're talking about otherworldly or other interdimensional beings that don't have the same form and format as we do. So it gets a little bit tricky there. So that's the best I can do with your question. I hope that was good enough. That was a challenging one. All right. Woot says the Bible says that all our days are numbered. From that, it seems like God has a plan for when we are supposed to die, and we won't die a day sooner. Is that interpretation correct? Because I seem to feel like our days might be numbered and planned, but it's still possible for us to make bad decisions and go off course. I think you're absolutely right. I think we should be careful to think that, well, I'm invincible until I'm not. Um, on the one hand, yeah, we're going to live as long as we're going to live, and only God knows that, which is, part of that. But certainly people can and have taken matters into their own hands, and they have ended their lives. And I would suppose that God probably didn't want them to end it that way. So, but did he know that they were going to end it that way? Well, of course. So, to say all our days are numbered, it's not to say that God has necessarily put a number on my days, but that our days are numbered. In other words, they're not infinite. That's one key takeaway there. And secondly, he knows the number of our days, right? He can, look at my life, right? And he can say, okay, he knows that I'm going to live what, I don't know, 25,000, 30,000 days. Okay. Something like that. Who knows? Well, hopefully longer. I'll go for 40,000. All right. But he knows that there's a specific number, that maybe I'll get to 38,292, and that's the end of it. Right. And so he already knows that. He knows the number of my days. And my free will choices are obviously already known to him, and they've been calculated into, or however God does math. But he already knows what my decisions are going to do in relationship to the number of my days. So it's not to say that he has necessarily planned the amount of my days, but he knows the amount of my days. Okay, so there's a subtle difference there, but it is a difference. All right, Maria asks, what do you think will be the connection between AI and aliens for end times? How will they work together? Oh, that's a great question, Maria. I talk a lot about that in Corrupting the Image Volume 3. I think that there is going to be some kind of a spiritual network, uh, that the image of the beast will be a spiritual network. I think it will begin as AI. I think AI will greatly feature in that, will prominently feature in this connection that we all have. That when somebody signs on, takes the mark of the beast, they then maybe they have Google in their brain or something like that. But I don't think that's where it ends. I think that's merely a connection point, and then I think there will be a transition period. I can't prove all of this. This is certainly some speculation on my part, but that Satan is going to knit us together, because when somebody takes this new takes the mark and they take on his essence, they take on his seed, I think they will have to uh, swear allegiance to him in their mind's eye or in their spirit, or however that works, and that they will then give their autonomy to him. I have a scene about that in Regenesis code. So if you haven't read that, you might want to take a look at that because I um, put it in a fun fiction way that I think would it's my understanding of how it's going to work. So you can certainly check that out if you want to get more details. And as far as the aliens, again, I think the aliens are just fallen angels. I think they are the ones who will be at the back. They'll be in the background of the deception, and they're driving this desire of humanity to become aliens, to become one with the aliens, and that will is what will help them to take the mark of the beast, so that they can then become like the aliens. That's how I see it. So a little tricky. All right. This is from Dean. What are your thoughts on the kenosis belief from Philippians 2:7? I don't hold to that belief, and I am finding that it is a popular teaching among a lot of evangelical circles. How would you explain Philippians 2:7 and combat that belief? All right. Well, let's take a look at that, Dean, because that is a very interesting passage to say the least. So let me pull up the Bible here, and we will go to Philippians 2:7. All right, so Philippians 2:7. All right, so let's take a look at the Greek here because that's what he's talking about. This whole idea of kenosis. Okay, so this is the word in question, ekenosen. All right, and the word kenosis, it means to empty. So he emptied himself, right? So but he himself, uh again, you have echinosin morphine. He, took himself, made himself of no reputation. Let's look at a few other translations just to get a feel for what they're doing. I often like the New English Translation. I think they do a pretty good job. So here it says, he emptied himself by taking the form of a slave, by looking like other men, and by sharing in human nature. Let's look at the New American Standard, right? So it says, but he emptied himself, taking the form of a bondservant. So that's pretty similar. How about the ESV? They say, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant. Okay, let's look at Young's literal, in a sense, but did empty himself the form of a servant, having taken the likeness of men. So, I think that is actually an accurate translation. This word ekinosen, it means to empty. So, how could it be that Yeshua could actually empty himself? Uh, well, there's going to be some mystery to that for sure. But I would suggest that it might be likened to a king who has on all of his royal robes, his crown, his rings, his necklaces, and all that stuff. And then one day he decides to go out and visit his people, but he wants to see how they live without him showing up as king, right? So he takes off all of his stuff. He takes off the crown, he takes off the royal robe, okay, and he takes off the rings and the necklaces, and he just becomes and looks like any other man. And he goes out and he is observing the people. So I think that's a decent way to understand it. Now, how can it be that Jesus can empty himself? Is he emptying from the inside, or is that kind of an outside type thing? Uh, I don't know exactly, right? I mean, I'm not. I can only tell you what I can read in Scripture. That's as far as I can go. But he certainly laid something aside. He, just like a king might put aside his crown, Jesus put aside his crown. He even talks about this with the glory that he shared with the Father before the foundation of the world in John 17, right? He laid that aside and he emptied himself and he took the form of a servant. So, rather than fight against it, I think I would rather support that because I think it's an accurate teaching of what we see there. So, in my mind, it makes good sense. I think the language makes sense, and I hold to that position. All right, Mark asks, do you think the meeting with Jesus, Moses, and Elijah actually took place on the Mount of Transfiguration, or do you think that it was a dream or vision? I'm asking because if it wasn't a vision or dream, then wouldn't that be considered necromancy spoken against in Leviticus 19:31? I do think it truly did happen. I don't think it falls anywhere in the realm of necromancy in the least. So Jesus was not conjuring these two. Um, Necromancy is to use some type of occult power or occult connections, by using demons or fallen angels to bring up the dead. We saw that the witch of Endor did that, and that was highly frowned upon. Um, and Saul, or excuse me, Samuel simply came as a spirit. Now, Moses and Elijah came in a very glorious form. They were sent by God, so there was nothing at all that resembles necromancy in the least. And I do think that it actually happened on the Mount of Transfiguration. I think it actually happened on Mount Hermon, to be specific. And so that's yeah, I think it definitely happened. And if it didn't happen, I think that would greatly diminish the credibility of the Bible, because the Bible tells us that it did, in fact, happen. But I don't think that there's any connection at all. I think you're hard pressed to make a good case that it's resembling necromancy. Ed asks Exodus 23:13 and Joshua 23:7, and others say not to even mention the name of other gods or let their names be on our lips, yet we mention them all of the time in our lessons and writings. At least I do, have done. Are we in sin? Ed, I think it's a very interesting question, and I've actually thought the same thing. Um, it's definitely a challenge, but I think we should turn to the scriptures to see what was happening in the scripture. So we're told to just leave them alone, but we also see that God talks about those specific gods a number of times through the prophets. Why? Because he's denouncing them. So there's a certain amount of denunciation of those gods that is happening. There's in no sense any type of endorsement, excitement, um, signing on to what those gods were talking about. So let's take a look here in the text just to get a better sense of what's going on. Um, so let's see here. And in all that I've said to you, be circumspect and not to make mention of other gods, nor let it be heard from your mouth. All right. So, um, what we have there is, well, let's go back here. So 6 days, you're going to do all these things, leave these gods out of what you're doing. Because, he talks in other places, as you suggested there in your question, which was Joshua 23:7. Let's take a look at that one as well. Joshua 23. Why is it not? I don't know why it's not going there. Hold on. For some reason, let me try again. That's weird. Well, who knows? Sometimes software works amazing and sometimes it doesn't. All right. Right. So let's see. I'm trying to figure out where else that says that. Let me just hold on. I'm getting there. All right. So don't even mention it. Only take heed to yourself. There we go. Let's go to Deuteronomy. For what great nation is there that has God so near to it as the Lord our God is to us, for whatever reason we may call upon him? And what great nation is there that has such statutes and righteous judgments that are in all this law which I have set before you today? Only take heed to yourself and diligently keep yourself, lest you forget the things your eyes have seen, unless they depart from your heart all the days of your life, and teach them to your children and your grandchildren. All right. So again, stay away from those other things. So I think the context here, basically what we're getting at, I think the context is to not mention those other gods in any kind of endorsement that somehow they can do what the God of Israel can do. I don't suppose that it would be a sin to talk about them in a historical context. Certainly, we see that happening, right? We see that happening in the pages of the Bible itself. So I think that can basically be our measuring stick on that question. All right, thanks, Ed. Great question. And let's go to Julie. She says, what is the best biblical counter to someone who says that Matthew 24:34 proves that the millennial reign already happened in that generation, and we are now in the little season of Satan? Well, yeah. All right, let's take a look at the passage. So let's start there. Matthew 24:34. So Matthew 24:34. All right. Surely I say to this generation, by knowing it means pass away till all these things take place. Let me share that with you guys. All right. So, um, this, I think, I've certainly spent a lot of ink on this question right here, because it's a very interesting one. Let's back up a little bit. All right. Learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So, also, when you see all these things, all right, so let's stop right here. What all things are we talking about? When you see all these things, what things? What things are we talking about? We have to go back into the text and look at all these things. When you see all these things, know that it's near. Well, okay, let's go back and look at all these things, right? So they're saying, "Hey, Lord, when's all this stuff going to take place? Tell us what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age." Frankly, I don't think there should be a comma there, but whatever. "And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" Again, take out the comma. I think that is poorly placed. It gives you the impression that there are two different thoughts here, but your coming and the end of the age are one event. All right. So tell us what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age. Well, then he says, okay, don't be deceived. Lots of stuff's going to happen. A lot of tribulation is going to happen. All that's going to happen. And then he gives the big sign, the abomination of desolation, right? That's the big thing that is going to happen. And we see that Yeshua is going to come back, right? And he says, after the tribulation of those days, right? What tribulation? Well, it's going to be the worst. For then there will be great tribulation, such as not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. All right, so it's going to be a doozy, and nothing ever will eclipse that time as far as it being the worst time ever. All right, so now let's go back to the question. When you see all these things, well, have we seen the worst thing that could possibly happen? Now, this is where some of our preterist friends say, well, it was really terrible what happened in AD 70. And I would say, yes, that was absolutely terrible. No question about it. All right. The Romans came in, they attacked Jerusalem. A lot of people died. Right. And it was very sad. It was a very, very sad time. But come on, guys, let's let's just be realistic for a moment. Was that really the worst thing that has happened in all of human history? Can we really say that AD 70 outdoes everything? Did it outdo the Inquisition? I don't know. Did it outdo the Holocaust, in which 6 million died? Or just World War II, which about 50 million people died? Or Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? About 110, maybe 130 or 40,000 people died. Those were pretty intense, right? Um, and can we say that AD 70 was the worst ever. Because if you take that position, which some preterists do, to suggest that that was the worst thing ever, then anything that happened since then, they're like, oh, that wasn't really so bad because AD 70 was the worst thing. And I think that is absolutely sticking your head way down deep in the sand. Okay. I mean, way down deep. You are just ignoring, you're putting your fingers to your ears. I'm not going to listen. I'm not looking. I don't care what you tell me. I think it's ridiculous. Okay. So Jesus tells us that there's a time coming that will be the worst ever, right? And of course, the book of Revelation, the book of Isaiah, and many others detail some of the events. Well, the events that are going to happen, and they're going to be crazy. Did we see the abyss open up and 200 million scary looking creatures come out? No, we didn't see that yet. We definitely did not see that. Did we see someone go into the Holy of Holies and declare himself to be God, thereby doing the abomination of desolation, as spoken of by Daniel the prophet? No, we didn't. Did we see the power of the elect completely destroyed? No, we didn't. Right? And many, many other things. Have we seen the mark of the beast? No, we haven't. All right. So while there are definitely grievances in the world, there are problems, there are terrible things that have happened. Um, Sadly, it can still get worse. All right. It can still get worse. That's the really bummer part of this whole thing. It can get worse. I wish that, 70 AD had been the worst thing ever and it could never get worse than that. But that's just, again, sticking your head in the sand and not even remotely looking at the facts of what's been happening. All right. Let me take a few more questions here. I'm looking forward to these, of course. So we've got a few more. This is from, it's good. Doug, why don't you believe that Messiah 2030 documentary could come to pass? Well, calling skeptical, I've heard people talking about the sky falling for a very long time. And I think we have to be so incredibly careful. We had, oh my goodness, I just forgot his name, but but in 2011, what was his name? You guys will think of it. Anyway, 2011, what's his name? Family Life Radio. Anyway, that guy. So he was convinced that it was going to happen in May 25th of 2011. Guess what? It didn't happen. So then he's like, oh, actually, it's in the fall. But then again, it didn't happen. I mean, this has been happening for so long, right? You had the Jehovah's Witnesses, 1914. Oh, they were just convinced that was going to happen. Well, then of course, it didn't. And so then they came up with some other dates. And guys, this has been happening. I'm old enough at this point in my life to say I've lived through some of these things, right? I used to work at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, where Pastor Chuck Smith was the pastor. Great guy. I really appreciate him. But, he was kind of on the bandwagon that, 1981 was going to be amazing. Why 1981? Well, because 1948, when Israel was established, until 1988, that's 40 years. Subtract 7 for the tribulation. And so therefore, the rapture just had to happen. Right. And it's Harold Camping. That's who I'm trying to think of. Harold Camping did it in 2011. But anyway, you had, so what's great about 88? Well, all these other reasons why the rapture, whatever is going to happen in 1988. Of course, it didn't happen. I was still very pre-trib around 2005. And I remember Ahmadinejad, the Iranian president, was doing all kinds of saber rattling. And oh man, there was so much expectation. We were excited. We're like, oh my goodness, this is it. You have Iran, right? Persia. They're the ones that are spoken of by Ezekiel the prophet, and they're going to come against Israel and all this different stuff. And this is when I used to think that Rosh was Russia. All the pieces were just lining up. And guess what happened? Nothing. Right. Then I thought, well, maybe 2011, 2012. I mean, gosh, you had the Mayan calendar. That I had all these different criteria. I could add up all these different things of like this, I was making an airtight case, right? And it wasn't happening. Of course, it didn't happen, right? But I'll tell you what, when I saw Fukushima happened and the incredible devastation. And then you add that to the Mayan calendar, you add that to the collapse of the US dollar, you add all these different things. And we were going to have the collapse of wheat. Wheat was going to fall apart. I mean, I was looking at a lot of different websites. All right. I want you to understand that. I was looking at Zero Hedge, talking about how the economy is going to collapse. And of course, 2008, right? We had the collapse, the near collapse of the Federal Reserve and all this different stuff. And every time we kept thinking, man, this is it. This is it. I know that Tom Horn, okay, I'm going to kind of call him out because, he was pushing the 2012 narrative. And then guess what? That didn't happen. Then when I was 2016, right? Then that was kind of the year to watch. And guess what? Nothing happened, right? I myself was sort of like, maybe 2018, right? This was, of course, back in around 2005 when 2018 was a ways off. I wasn't saying, hey, this is going to happen, but I'm like, maybe, or maybe 2028, right? Again, because, hey, 70 or if by 80, right? And Psalm 90 is talking about that. The days of our lives are 70 years, or if by reason of strength, 80. So 1948 plus one of those two takes you to 2018 to 2028. Those seemed like good possibilities. And again, I'm not saying that 2028 couldn't be it. I'm highly suspicious. I don't think it's going to be. We're already in 2023. Now, where do I stand today? Well, I'm like, clearly those didn't happen. If there's any validity to the year of 1948 and this idea of a generation, which I just read about in Matthew 24, we're kind of at the mercy of, what is a generation? Okay, is it? And I did a whole study. I did a lot of this in Corrupting the Image Volume 1. If you want to check it out, I wrote a paper about this, right? And again, I was trying to be very careful. I didn't tell anybody to sell their house or do anything stupid. I was speculating, all right? And I think if we leave it in the realm of speculation, but the movie 2023, even though they're kind of like, we're not saying that, but yeah, they kind of are, because people don't listen to that. That's why every time I get asked this question, I'm very, very cautious, because as many disclaimers as I can give, people don't listen to those disclaimers. And they're like, Doug said it's going to be this year. And I'm not saying that. Okay. So on an academic level, again, please quote me, academic level, do I think 2048 could be? I'm like, it's interesting. Okay. I'll give it that. I think it's a very interesting year. I think it's fascinating that the transhumanists think that we're going to achieve the singularity by 2045. 2045, if I plug it into the biblical framework, that would suggest that, hey, maybe the abomination of desolation is going to happen in 2045. And then you add 3 more years, that takes you to what? 2048, right? Do I think that's a possibility? Of course I do, right? I think it's a possibility. Do I think that it's absolutely going to happen? No, right? And I'll tell you, guys, keep living your lives. If you're about to get married, do it. If you're thinking about having babies, do it. If you're thinking, should I go into all this work to become a doctor, a lawyer, or whatever career you want to do, go for it. We do not know when the Lord is coming. And at 2030, I think, again, we're just in that period of rank speculation. We're getting excited, and I think it's going to fizzle, and it's going to come to nothing. So that is why I poo-poo the idea, because I've seen Chicken Little running around too many times. I sort of started getting caught up in the Chicken Little syndrome. Hey, look, I remember back in 2014 and 2015, we had the blood red moons. Oh my goodness. Guys, I used to do a lot of that, kind of forecasting. I called it There Will Be Signs, and it was incredibly popular. I mean, this was probably at the height of my popularity, rocking around 2008, 2009 to around 2012. I was a lot more popular back then because I was pre-trib, and I was telling you all the bad stuff that's going to happen. I was telling you all the conspiracy theories of why it's going to happen this way. And I was, I wasn't predicting, but I was forecasting as to, like, man, it's coming. And people love it. You know why they love it? Because they like fear. Fear sells. Fear is sexy. And people like that. It gets that little adrenaline. It gets that kind of dopamine going in their heads. And that's why they love it. And I want to be very careful. I don't want to espouse this fear because I know that I'm going to be judged for what I teach people. And so I want to be very careful. Now, again, on an academic level, do I think 2048 could happen? Hey, maybe. A lot of things could happen, right? But I am in no way making any predictions at all about when it's going to happen. And I definitely don't think it's going to happen in 2038. All right. Well, man, you got me on a soapbox there. DPR asks, is there a pre or post tribulation rapture? I'm a little stuck on that subject. DPR, I definitely think that there is a gathering. If you want to call it the rapture, that's okay. But there's definitely a gathering. In fact, if you want to check out my book, Reclaiming the Rapture, I would encourage you to do that. So that's on Amazon or my website, douglashamp.com. I co-authored that with Chris Steinley. So I definitely think there is a gathering of God's people after the rapture, or excuse me, after the tribulation. There we go. Oh my goodness. All right. So good. Hope we got to that one. And good. Let's see. Last question. This is from David. I've heard 1 Corinthians 16:2 used to prove Sabbath is now on Sunday. Isn't that the opposite since they are conducting finances? Great point. Yeah. You don't do your finances or your financial contributions on the Sabbath. It seems to be what Paul's talking about there. In fact, let's take a look at that passage. 1 Corinthians 16:2. All right. So now concerning the collection for the saints, as I've given orders to the churches of Galatia, so you must do also on the first day of the week, let each of you lay something aside, storing up as he may prosper, that there be no collections when I come. I think this is the day when you get back into business. First day of the week is first day of business. And so that would be the day that they would go around and make these collections, not on the Sabbath, not on the Saturday Sabbath. So good point. I think you kind of answered it, and I will certainly endorse what you were basically saying. So thank you for that, David. Thank you, everybody. I love your questions. Thank you. Keep bringing them. Even if I disagree with you, bring your questions. I love your questions, right? We don't have to agree on everything, but it's a lot of fun to discuss these things. So I'm just giving you my opinion on it. You can take it or leave it, but that's that. Well, God bless you, and I'll talk to you next week.